The snow fell silently, blanketing the city in a cold, unforgiving hush. On a park bench, under a flickering street lamp, Walter sat hunched over, his thin coat barely shielding him from the wind. His fingers trembled violently, their tips an alarming shade of blue. The soaked cardboard beneath him offered little insulation, and the dampness had begun to seep through to his bones. His lips moved, barely audible. "I used to have a home, a name." The words vanished into the frosty air like smoke. People passed him, their footsteps hurried and eyes fixed forward. Some glanced with discomfort, others didn't look at all. Walter had become part of the background, like the littered leaves or the cracked pavement. Forgotten. Invisible. But then, the rhythm of the street changed. A soft crunch of boots stopped in front of him. He didn't look up at first. No one ever stopped. But this time, someone did. A presence, still, unafraid, and warm, stood beside him. He felt it before he saw it. Slowly, cautiously, he raised his eyes. There she was. A woman in a red coat, eyes kind, hands gloved and holding a steaming cup of coffee. She didn't say anything at first. She simply knelt beside him, wrapping a scarf gently around his neck. In that moment, the world didn't feel quite so cold. Not because the wind had stopped, but because, for the first time in a long while, someone had. Someone stayed. Elena didn't ask questions. She didn't bombard him with pity or preach with hollow sympathy. She simply sat beside Walter, letting the silence speak first. Her presence was gentle, like warmth returning to frozen skin, slow, patient, and real. She offered the coffee without a word, and after a moment, Walter took it with trembling hands. The heat stung at first, a painful reminder that he was still alive. Still human. He glanced sideways at her, unsure. Most people who acknowledged him stayed only long enough to feel better about themselves. But she didn't fidget. She didn't pull her coat tighter. She just looked at him, fully, as if seeing more than the dirt on his clothes or the beard on his face. She saw a person. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice cracking like dry wood. Elena turned to him with a quiet smile. "Because you are." Walter didn't know how to respond. His world had been reduced to survival, to hours counted in missed meals and freezing nights. Now, someone had entered that world without turning away. A police car rolled by in the distance, its lights flashing across the snow. A child's laughter echoed faintly from the far side of the park. Life continued around them. But here, on this bench, something had changed. She didn't move to leave. And Walter, for the first time in years, didn't want her to. The shelter was modest, peeling walls, flickering lights, but to Walter, it felt like a palace. Elena led him through the door gently, as if afraid he might vanish if rushed. The warmth inside wrapped around him like a blanket, and the smell of soup filled the air. Volunteers smiled as they passed, but no one stared. No one judged. In the back room, Elena handed him clean clothes and waited while he washed. When Walter emerged, hair damp, face clean, he caught his reflection in a dusty mirror. He barely recognized the man staring back. The grime was gone, but the years, the grief, the loneliness, they still clung to him. He looked older than he remembered. Worn. Hollow. He sat at a small table, hands wrapped around a bowl of hot soup. Elena sat across from him, quiet but present. She didn't press. Still, the words tumbled out. "I was a teacher," he said, eyes lowered. "History. 20 years. My wife, she got sick. After she passed, I couldn't keep it together. I stopped showing up. Lost the house. Lost everything. And no one came looking." He wasn't crying, but something in his voice cracked open, like ice breaking underfoot. "I thought I didn't matter anymore." Elena reached across the table and placed her hand over his. You do, she said simply. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was healing. For the first time in a long time, Walter felt seen. Not as a burden. Not as a ghost. But as a man finding his way back. A week later, the chill in the air had softened, and so had something in Walter. With Elena's encouragement, he stood in front of a small group of middle school students in a public school classroom. He looked unsure at first, his hands fidgeted, his eyes searched the floor, but then, he saw the faces looking up at him, curious, expectant. And something steady returned to his voice. I used to teach students just like you, he began, a quiet strength behind his words. I told stories about the past, about people who overcame hard things. What I didn't know then, was that I'd become one of those stories myself. The room was silent. He spoke not about the streets, but about the silence of grief. The slow, invisible collapse of a life. How easy it is to fall when no one's looking, and how hard it is to rise without a hand to hold. The students listened, really listened, not out of politeness, but because they could feel the truth in every word. One girl raised her hand, her voice small. But, how did you come back? Walter paused, looked toward the window where sunlight streamed in, and smiled. Someone stayed. From the hallway, Elena watched quietly, her eyes brimming with tears. She had given him warmth, yes, but more than that, she had given him purpose again. And now, Walter was giving it back, one story, one student, one heart at a time. The park looked different now, not because the trees had changed, or the bench had been replaced, but because something within Walter had. The snow had melted, replaced by soft grass and spring sunlight. Where once he sat cold and forgotten, he now sat tall, beside Elena, a friend. A partner. A man restored. They weren't alone anymore. A group of volunteers, inspired by Walter's story, moved through the park handing out warm meals, socks, and simple kindness. Walter smiled as he passed a sandwich to an elderly man curled beneath a tree. He didn't flinch or pity, he knelt, met his eyes, and called him, sir. He knew what it meant to be seen. Elena laughed nearby with a little boy whose father had been living in a shelter for months. She glanced over at Walter and nodded. No words were needed. They had built something. Not a shelter or a program, but a movement. A reminder. Walter returned to the bench where it all began, and Elena joined him. The sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the park. You ever think you'd be back here like this? She asked softly. He looked around, eyes full of peace. Not like this, he said. But I'm glad I am. She smiled, resting her head briefly on his shoulder. And as people passed by, some still rushed, some still unaware, others stopped. Smiled. Asked how they could help. Because one day, when the world turned away, she stayed. And because she stayed, he did too.